When I was 19, my cousin, whom I'll refer to as Ellie, falsely accused me of sexual assault. This accusation led my family to ostracize me, cutting off my college fund and removing me from the family home. Ellie, who is 4 years older than me, was once close to me during our childhood. Over the years, we drifted apart. She is the only child of my uncle, a respected single father, and my mum's younger brother. My uncle, having married young due to an unexpected pregnancy, was later betrayed by his wife, who left him after a brief marriage. Despite these setbacks, he devoted himself entirely to raising Ellie. He had managed to set aside a college fund for her, but made it clear that after her undergraduate degree, she would need to finance any further education herself, as he needed to save for his retirement. Ellie often disagreed with her father's decision, leading to frequent arguments between them. During these times, she would seek refuge with my family, venting to my mum about her frustrations. One particular day when my parents were out and I was the only one at home, Ellie arrived unexpectedly. I informed her that my mum wasn't home, expecting her to leave, but she chose to stay and vent to me instead. As she complained about her father, I expressed a different viewpoint. I told her that while my mum might have supported her views, I believed her father's expectations were reasonable. He had raised her to be independent, and it was now time for her to stand on her own. Frustrated, I suggested that if she found balancing work and further studies too challenging, perhaps she should reconsider her educational ambitions. This conversation did not sit well with Ellie. Shortly after, she accused me of assault, a claim that my family accepted without question, leading to the drastic changes in my life. Recently, as Ellie faces a terminal illness, she admitted to fabricating the accusation. Despite her confession, my family has asked me to remain silent about the truth. The dynamics within my family, influenced by past betrayals and my uncle's stoic independence, have shaped a complex web of relationships and decisions. This situation underscores the profound impact of false accusations and the deep scars they leave not just on the accused, but within the fabric of an entire family. I had always done so much for her, but instead of showing appreciation, she acted as if I were the villain in her story. It seemed she wasn't ready for the dose of reality I gave her. After I confronted her, she erupted in anger, labeling me a terrible person, accusing me of being a privileged brat who couldn't possibly grasp her struggles. Despite her harsh words, I found it ironic since she appeared more privileged than I ever was. She hurled insults at me for a few minutes before storming out of the house in tears. I chose not to chase after her. I was tired of the repetitive nature of her complaints. Unexpectedly, the situation escalated the next day when she accused me of sexual assault. This accusation turned my life upside down, isolating me from everyone, including my family. It took 2 years for people to discover her allegations were false, and only then did my family begin to reconnect with me. The day after our argument, a chaotic morning followed. My parents, visibly shaken, woke me early to inform me that my uncle and she were downstairs, claiming an urgent matter. I was oblivious to the severity until I faced them. She theatrically recounted a fabricated story of assault from the night before, while my uncle, deeply troubled, relayed to my parents how she had returned home distraught and eventually confessed her made-up ordeal to him. As she performed her breakdown, no one seemed to hear my protests of innocence. It was devastating to be treated as a criminal by my own family. In a desperate bid for acknowledgement, I ended up throwing a vase against the wall, which only worsened matters. My father, furious, dragged me to my room and locked me in. I pounded on the door until my arms hurt, determined not to let her deceit go unchallenged. It was a monumental lie, one that threatened to destroy my reputation and change my life forever. Unfortunately, my father didn't let me out of the room until my uncle and Ellie had left. When he finally opened the door, I burst into tears and tried to explain that I was innocent. But my parents had already made up their minds. They revealed that they had reviewed the security footage, which showed Ellie arriving and then quickly leaving our house in distress. based on her emotional exit, they chose to believe her story over mine. My parents expressed deep disappointment, ashamed of the son they believed they had raised. My mother was too emotional to speak, while my father explained the difficult bargain they had struck to avoid legal consequences. My uncle and Ellie had agreed not to pursue any legal action in exchange for certain concessions from my parents. As part of the agreement, my father decided I would be sent away to live with my great-uncle in Lower, a man known for his poor temper and whom I particularly disliked. This place was chosen because it was the farthest I could be from our family home. Moreover, they decided to transfer my college fund to Ellie to ensure her silence about the incident. I tried to protest, but my parents were unyielding. Feeling utterly defeated, I began to suspect that Ellie's false accusations were motivated by a desire to manipulate my parents for financial gain, especially since her own father would never accept such help. Within days, I was packed and ready to leave. My parents barely acknowledged my presence during those last days at home. There were no goodbyes, no hugs. They had confiscated my phone and insisted I cut all ties with my past life, threatening that any failure to disappear completely would force them to expose the situation publicly, potentially ruining my life further. So, I left everything and everyone I knew behind because of Ellie's lie. When my great-uncle came to pick me up, I was sent into what felt like exile. Adjusting to life with him was incredibly difficult. He taunted me daily, despite not knowing the full reason for my banishment, using my situation as an excuse to mock me constantly. Living with him was like walking on eggshells, always trying to avoid triggering his anger. Though I knew my parents were financially supporting him, he acted as if he were doing me a huge favour by allowing me to stay. Resigned to my new reality, I stopped lamenting my circumstances and focused on moving forward. My parents had severed ties with me completely, leaving me to rebuild my life from scratch in a place where I was unwanted and underappreciated. Cut off from everyone I once knew, I was left with no choice but to carve out a new path for myself. I couldn't attend the college I had been accepted to since my family had redirected my college fund elsewhere, and I lacked the financial means to pursue higher education on my own. Thus, I turned my attention to finding a job. After a few weeks of feeling dejected and attending several interviews, I secured a position as a labourer. The job was physically demanding and didn't pay well, which added to my misery, but it was a start. Receiving my first paycheck was a turning point. It meant I could finally leave my great-uncle's place, which was a relief both for me and, I suspected, for him. Around the same time, I bonded with two co-workers who were in similar financial straits. We pooled our resources and rented an apartment together, a move that marked the beginning of a better phase in my life. Over the next 2 years, my roommates and I changed jobs frequently, always in search of better opportunities and more bearable working conditions. The constant job switching was tough, but it allowed us to save money with a shared goal, to eventually afford college. Currently, I work in cafe, which pays decently, and I'm considering reapplying to colleges. My roommates are also doing well. We've even moved into a larger apartment in a nicer neighbourhood. Just as life seemed to stabilise and improve, my estranged family attempted to re-enter my life. It had been 2 years of silence when suddenly my father emailed me. I hadn't blocked my family's contacts, partly because I adhered strictly to their conditions when they expelled me, fearing they might further tarnish my reputation if I breached their directives. The email from my dad was unexpected. It contained an apology for everything that had transpired over the past years, and a request for my current contact information so he could reach out more formally. He also provided his contact details in case I wanted to initiate communication on my terms. The reason behind his outreach and apology was even more startling. Ellie was on her deathbed and had confessed the truth about the false accusations she had made against me years ago. Her confession to her father had prompted him to inform my parents of the real circumstances. Ellie had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and it seemed her grave condition had prompted a moment of conscience, leading her to rectify the lies that had caused so much disruption in my life. While the news of her illness was tragic, it brought a grim sense of closure to the ordeal that had upended my existence. Now, with the truth out, I faced the complex decision of whether to reconnect with my family and how to process the overdue admission of my innocence. Ellie has been grappling with her health for the past 8 months, enduring a steady decline despite ongoing treatment. Sadly, her situation hasn't improved, and she wasn't even able to benefit from the money she took from my college fund. Instead of investing in her education, she chose to take a gap year to travel the world, seeking to expand her horizons and find herself. However, her extravagant lifestyle quickly depleted her savings. By the time she returned a year and a half later, she had burned through more than half of her funds, living luxuriously and far beyond her means. Facing dwindling resources, she approached my parents for more financial support, but my uncle intervened, threatening to cut her off if she continued to drain their finances. Consequently, she abandoned her plans for a master's degree as she couldn't afford the tuition without a job, a commitment she was unwilling to make. With the remnants of her savings, Ellie could have made prudent investments or saved for the future. Yet, her year-long holiday seemed to have fostered a sense of laziness, and her spoiled nature led her to further squander her funds. She bought an apartment and continued her lavish lifestyle without securing a job. Eventually, she did find employment, but soon after, she was diagnosed with cancer, which forced her to quit. Her financial recklessness caught up with her, compelling her to sell her apartment and possessions to cover her medical expenses. Reading about her downfall in the email from my dad, I couldn't help but feel a sense of ironic justice. Ellie, once my accuser, had become her own worst enemy. After absorbing the news, I faced a dilemma about whether to reconnect with my parents. I discussed it with my friends, the only close confidants I had, which meant revealing the full extent of my past troubles for the first time. Initially, I had only shared with them that I was kicked out due to some disagreements. Now, I explained everything about Ellie's deceit, how my parents had sided with her, and how they had not only exiled me but also threatened to tarnish my reputation if I defied them. My friends were shocked by my story and strongly advised against reconciling with my parents. They suggested that, given everything I had endured, I should speak out about my ordeal. Their perspective was compelling. For 1 year, I had lived in fear and isolation because of a lie. My friends believed that if I wanted to reclaim my life and integrity, I needed to make the truth known. Encouraged by their support, I decided to confront my parents. I planned to share my version of events publicly, believing that people deserved to know the truth. This was not just about clearing my name. It was about shedding light on the injustice I had suffered and preventing such harm from befalling others. Despite Ellie's grave condition, I couldn't just overlook the profound impact her actions had on my life. After years of silence and compliance, I was ready to reclaim my narrative, so I used the contact number my dad had provided to inform him of my intentions. I wasn't seeking his permission, rather I was just notifying him out of courtesy. I had the screenshots of the email he sent confirming Ellie's deception, which I could use to share my story publicly, and I was ready to finally re-engage with social media after being barred from it. However, my message seemed to have been misunderstood. Soon, my phone was inundated with calls and texts from my dad, mum, and even my uncle, all pleading with me not to go public. They argued that Ellie had already suffered enough, and that exposing her further would only ruin her reputation irreparably. They suggested I could reintegrate into my old life as if nothing had happened, without anyone questioning my sudden disappearance and return. But that approach didn't sit right with me. Ellie's actions had stripped a significant part of my life away, and my friends agreed it was reasonable for me to want to share my truth. It wasn't about revenge. It was about transparency and closure. I wasn't even planning on returning to my old city. I was content where I was. However, I missed my friends and the relatives who had treated me well. I felt they deserved to know the real reason behind my prolonged absence. The persistent calls and messages from my family were the only things holding me back. They stressed that Ellie was in very poor health and practically begged me not to post anything. Yet, I wondered, what if I went ahead and shared my story anyway, explaining why I had to leave everything behind for 2 years and expose the truth about my cousin, even though she was on her deathbed? I did it, after much deliberation and countless discussions with my friends, who consistently supported my decision. I chose to proceed. They reminded me that Ellie and my family had taken 2 years of my life, during which I had lived in constant fear, despite my innocence. After 1 year of being essentially off the grid, disconnecting from everyone who knew me, including friends and relatives, I've recently reconnected, and the warmth I've received has been overwhelming. Initially, many had reached out, but it seems my parents had told everyone that I needed solitude to recover from a traumatic experience, prompting them to stop contacting me out of respect for my space. Hearing from my friends and relatives about their repeated inquiries into my whereabouts, which my parents had obfuscated, really moved me. It made me realise how much they cared and had patiently waited for me to resurface. Learning that people hadn't forgotten me and were eager to welcome me back touched me deeply. Many expressed that they had always been suspicious of Ellie's character, and learning of her deceit reaffirmed their doubts. My parents and uncle have been silent so far, and I prefer it that way. I'm not ready to face them. Sharing my story publicly lifted a great burden from my shoulders, affirming that speaking out was the right decision. I don't regret it. A couple of days after my post, my parents reached out, expressing disappointment. They had hoped I would let sleeping dogs lie and fabricate some excuse for my absence, instead of revealing the truth to preserve Ellie's peace in her condition. Following my post, Ellie has seemingly lost most of her friends, and no family member wishes to associate with her, which my parents blame on me. It's astonishing that even now, their concern seems to pivot more around Ellie than the years of hardship I endured. Their apology felt insufficient, and I told them bluntly that their disappointment was no longer my concern. They had let me down profoundly, and now they had no right to expect anything from me. If they believe Ellie deserves peace because of her illness, I argued that I deserved the same consideration when they sent me away at 19 to live with a difficult relative, yet received none. I informed them that I did not want any further contact, and then took the definitive step of blocking them, something I should have done long ago. Speaking my truth has not only provided closure, but freed me from the weight of dealing with them. Recently, I decided to visit my friends and family for the first time in 3 years, bringing my roommates along for moral support. It turned out to be an incredible reunion. My friends were thrilled to see me, and I even ended up staying at one of their homes instead of a hotel, as they were offended at the thought of me staying anywhere else. We've been having the time of our lives, catching up and bonding as if no time had passed. Additionally, I've reconnected with several relatives who've informed me they've severed ties with my parents, my uncle and Ellie, choosing to stand with me. It's heartening to see that they, like my friends, prioritise integrity and loyalty.